Hey family, welcome back. Atisha here. Happy Monday. Oh man, it's Monday. And it actually is Monday. Ironically enough, it really is Monday. It's Monday when I'm filming this, and it's going to be Monday when you see it. So hey guys. Don't mind me, you know. The sound of gravel. Do me a favor, hit the like button, and let's jump into chapter 27. Hopefully, this isn't a traumatic read. As a reminder, if you see the little pink triangle with the exclamation point in it at the bottom right corner in the thumbnail, that means we're talking about some content that may be triggering, even though it seems like every reading is triggering at this point because of how much Ruth has went through. So let's get to it. This can be your contribution to the family income, Lane said to my stepsister and me. Marie and I looked down at the table filled with pine nuts, our eyes barely disguising our contempt. I don't know what I had expected when I overheard Lane say, the kids can work too. But it definitely wasn't selling pine nuts on the side of the road in Albuquerque. Polygamists from LeBaron had a long history with pine nuts. Each fall, families would pack up their kids, make their way to the border, pick up a few Mexicans, and drive to one of the dense mountain forests in New Mexico, Nevada, or California. There, they would pick pine cones, separating the peonies? Pinones? I don't know how to pronounce that, but I know I butchered it. From the cones, and then sell them to the stores or to the restaurants in the area. The money they made from this was usually enough for a family to pay for a year in Mexico. Now Lane had decided we would be doing it too. Lane unloaded the camper onto a cement slab that sat next to a mobile home he had rented. With one bedroom and one bathroom, the single wide was roughly half the size of the one we had in El Paso. Oh my goodness. So you moved them again into even worse conditions because now they're in an even smaller space. Can they be kids? Can the kids be kids? Still, this one was newer looking and hadn't been in a fire, so I was satisfied. Oh, okay, I spoke too soon. Until I realized that Alejandro's family, not mine, would live in there. Oh, wow. Polygamy protocol dictated that the first wives always had the first pick of living quarters. I did not know this. And Alejandra had reasonably chosen the single wide. Mom and the six of us would be staying in the camper for the rest of the summer. So I'm over here complaining about the fact that she's in a smaller space and she's not even in that. She's going to be outside in the camper. I slept with Mom and Elena on the top bed that jutted over the cab of the truck, except every third night when it was Mom's turn with Lane. On those nights, I was demoted to the mattress in the camper's lower level and a restless night with four brothers in one bed. I was 11 years old enough to realize that our situation was ridiculous and humiliating. I also realized that things could have been worse. Susan and her family were staying in an even smaller dwelling nearby. The conditions there were so cramped. Susan and all her children slept on a single foam mattress surrounded by enormous brown bags of pinones. Is it pino? P-I? Alexa, how do you pronounce Pinones?
The pronunciation of pinones is either penones or penones.
Penones or penones. I think I'm going to say penones. I think I'm going to spell it because I'm butchering it. I tried, y'all. I'm sorry. I actually found myself grateful that Lane had married Mom second. Oh, wow. Marjorie, Lane's new fourth wife, didn't come to New Mexico with us. Lane had been spending less and less time with her, which seemed to make Mom happy. Mom said Marjorie was busy visiting her adult children who lived in California. Of the three families living in Albuquerque, Alejandra's had the nicest living situation, but I quickly realized that her privilege was a mixed blessing. Yes, she had a bathroom and a shower, but she had to share both with two other families who could use her facilities at any time, and hers was the only full-size kitchen too. The atmosphere while there, the three women tried to prepare meals for all of their families in that tiny space at the same time. It was always intense. Waiting for dinner meant huddling among three sets of siblings, suffocating and sweltering in front of a TV, especially with three women cooking in a hot kitchen. One of the worst aspects of the Pine Nuts experience was the food. We could rarely afford meat and certainly weren't allowed to eat the nuts we were selling. So we ate beans and rice, always, at every meal. Anything seemed preferable to sitting in a crowded camper and eating a bowl of beans and rice and selling pine nuts on the side of the road. I came to see something liberating in Maria's and my pine nut stand at the far corner of the Safeway parking lot, a spot we had chosen for its being near a busy intersection. People coming from any direction could see our card table, as well as our signs, the words pine nuts written large enough that drivers wouldn't confuse us with a lemonade stand. We sat for hours on end under a tattered green umbrella, waiting for cars or the odd Safeway shopper to stop by. Sometimes, when the boredom overwhelmed us, Maria and I would fill plastic bags with pine nuts, 1 pound in each, measuring them out with the help of an old rusty white scale from a grocery store. We also poured pine nuts into Dixie cups, which we sold for 50 cents a piece. We never had many customers, although people often stopped by to ask what those odd-shaped little nuggets were, as if they never seen them in their lives. I would launch into a long and detailed description of what pine nuts were, where they came from, and how they were picked and sorted. Anyone who stood there and patiently waited through my pitch was rewarded with a single pine nut as a free sample. Lane dropped us off with our card table each morning, and he drove by to check on us once a day too. And at the end of every day, Lane collected what little money we had made from our sales. He continually reminded us to give him each and every penny of our proceeds, but soon enough, Maria and I learned to skim off the top. We were just pocketing what we felt we were due. With the way he's treated their moms, I don't even care. I would say, that's not right. Don't steal. No, take it. Nothing more than the allowances other kids would get, or so we told ourselves. As soon as we were sure Lane was gone, we would skip off to a nearby McDonald's and blow a few dollars on cheeseburgers, ice cold Cokes, and ice cream sundaes. One day, I noticed Maria hiding more money than she usually spent on lunch, and I asked her about it. You can cut open old Polaroids, put the money behind the picture, and then tape it up, and no one will notice, she smiled proudly. What are you doing that for? I'm saving up my money. Why? So I can run away from home. Oh, wow. This took me by surprise. Maria hadn't complained about her home life before. I wondered if she wanted to run away because Lane was abusing her the way he'd been abusing me. That's the first thing I thought of. Maria was 13 and had already developed a woman's body. She wore her long, dark brown hair in 2 braids that went down the length of her back. Her flirtatious almond-shaped brown eyes were already earning her a great deal of attention, as were her full, perfectly shaped breasts that pounced under tight cotton t-shirts, and her pearl-shaped bottom. Whenever she walked across the street to McDonald's or walked anywhere in the public, men whistled and called out to her. I hate that is done, especially to children. Like Maria's, my breasts were growing and my body was changing. Over the past several months, ever since Elena had been born, it seemed as if Lane had been seeking me out more and more. Oh, goodness gracious. I tried to avoid all contact with him, but he was always asking me to accompany him on errands or to help him with tasks around town. Then he'd take me for a ride to a place where no one could find us, a barren parking lot, under a bridge, or into a dark alley that reeked of garbage. What are you all doing all the way over here? He'd ask in his high-pitched, nice man voice, a voice I never heard him use with anyone else or in any other situation. Come sit closer to me. I'm not gonna hurt you. He'd pull me onto his lap, his grimy hands reaching under my blouse for my developing breasts, which felt so tender and painful in his hands that I wanted to scream. I'd feel his penis stiffen beneath me, and then he'd grind his lap violently against the seat of my jeans. This is horrible. Her mother knows that he assaulted her, and yet she allows him to be alone with her daughter. It is bad enough that you stay with this man, but a part of me feels like, and I could be wrong, I just feel like you're encouraging the behavior by not at least making it so that she's never alone with him again. I felt so humiliated and powerless that I couldn't even recognize how much worse it would have been if Lane had unzipped his pants. Hearing that Maria wanted to run away and thinking it was because of Lane, I began to feel disgusted. I started thinking about what he might be doing to my beautiful stepsister. What awful experiences would lead a 13-year-old girl to stuff dollar bills behind family photos and run away into a world of strangers? Why do you want to run away? I asked Maria reluctantly. Maria noticed my serious tone, looked at me with concern, then smiled. If I stay here or in LeBaron, I'll never get to do what I want to do, she sighed. I'll just do what every other girl does, get married at 15. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be somebody's third wife. I'd be too jealous to share like that, you know? I nodded silently. I don't want to suffer the way my mom did when my dad took his other wives. Does your mom like it? No, I said quietly. She cries all the time. Mine does too. I don't want that. I watched her stuff the last of the dollar bills in her jeans and worked up the courage to ask her the question that had been plaguing me. Maria, does your dad ever kiss you on the mouth when you're alone with him? She looked up at me alarmed, as if she thought I was crazy. He's my dad. Why would he ever do something like that? I don't know, I replied as quickly as possible. Well, does he ever kiss you? No, I replied without a moment's hesitation. Of course not. Then why'd you ask me? I don't know. As much as it would have hurt to hear that Lane had been subjecting Maria to the same things that he'd been inflicting on me, it hurt more to know that he hadn't. Why had he only chosen me? I was consumed with a new and powerful desire. I wanted to run away too. But first, I'd have to save up the money. Wow. Oh, she probably felt so alone. She felt alone. Chapter 28. We lived in Albuquerque selling pine nuts for 2 months. Lane didn't have many jobs hauling loads during that time, and he pursued me as if he had missed me. He found every excuse possible to take me on errands. I just don't get this. I do not get how her mother allowed this. Kathy, I'm side-eyeing you, girl. I know that you're no longer here, but I'm side-eyeing you, girl, because this is crazy to me. To look for parts or to fix his truck or the single wide and to find more supplies for our stand. I did everything I could to avoid him, but in our three families' cramped space, there was no place to hide. Mom was distracted with the baby and my younger siblings and didn't even notice the extra attention our stepfather paid to me. Each morning, I'd wake up and vow that today would be the day I'd tell Mom what Lane was doing to me. But each day I found a reason why I couldn't share my secret. Mom was too tired. The babies had been up all night. Every time I came close to say something, a small voice in my head would tell me to keep silent, that it would only make things worse if I told the truth. And what if Mom didn't believe me? That voice is lame, because those are some of the very things that he said to her. But I was starting to feel desperate. Whenever Lane touched me, I felt he left fingerprints that stained my skin. His marks were everywhere, on my arms and chest and legs and private parts. And to see myself naked was to see a body covered from head to toe with these welts. I stopped looking at myself in the mirror, or even when I was fully clothed, a strategy that helped me live with my shame for a while at least. When the mirror was unavoidable, I would become so nauseated I had to look away. I could hardly keep from retching every time I combed my hair. So vivid were the stains of my stepfather's desires. As I hid from the mirrors, I hid from Lane too. I slept with the covers over my head and hoped against hope that the blanket could protect me. I thank God for my brothers who had been forced by circumstances to sleep sandwiched next to me in the same bed, which made Lane's nighttime advances impossible. I began to take refuge in a world of fantasies. I imagined slicing my wrists open and watching my soul escape through my wounds, floating up to heaven as my arms were bathed in blood. When I was 7 years old, a half-brother of mine, one of my father's sons, was with one of his other wives and had committed suicide. I had vivid memories of attending the funeral and watching so many people mourn the death of such a young, troubled soul. A few months after that half-brother died, another of my father's children followed suit, hanging herself with her husband's belt. Oh, wow. It came to seem that suicide ran in my family, and by the time we were living in New Mexico, I had become fixated on how I might be able to follow in my half-sibling's footsteps. She's 11, y'all. This is... I fantasized about slicing up my skin, cutting myself in all the places where Lane had touched me. I felt that my skin had betrayed me. Something on it must have been different that invited Lane's touches, something that indicated I want him, regardless of whatever I said otherwise. I had goodness and virtue in me, but it was wrapped in a skin that was evil. Because my skin was all the world knew of me, it gained the upper hand. The tug of suicide grew stronger each day, and as it did, I started thinking about what might be waiting for me in the afterlife. I am hearing this, you guys. I'm reading this and I'm hearing this. And I just am thankful that when I told my aunt what was happening to me, that she jumped in right away, believed me, and protected me. So I'm hearing this, knowing that she told her mom, hearing how she's developing self-loathing and she's not even wanting to look in the mirror and things of that nature, and how disgusted she feels with herself. And it's breaking my heart because she told her mom what was going on already, and her mom didn't believe her. And because her mom didn't believe her, here she is, and she's continuing to be assaulted. And unfortunately, this happens far too often where kids aren't believed. The afterlife has been explained to me in Sunday school and by my mother was run by men who had been polygamous on earth, men like my father and Lane. If I knew that men like Lane were in the afterlife, I wouldn't want to go to the afterlife. Let's be real. As man is, God once was. As God is, man may become. The church elders will remind us women who have been faithful and loyal wives would become goddesses. Heavenly servants to men who ruled over them. As I said before, that makes absolutely no sense. That somebody else is going to determine what's going to happen to me. That, oh, if he doesn't do right, then I can't make it there. Come on. But no one had ever explained what would become of girls like me. When I asked Mom what would happen to dead girls who hadn't been anyone's wife, she said my soul was sealed to my father. And if I died before I married, I would go to my dad's kingdom, not Lane's. This should have been comforting, and for a while it was, though gradually I began to doubt Mom's certitude. After all, I had already been born into my dad's kingdom, but that hadn't protected me from slipping into another one. How did I know that the same thing wouldn't happen in heaven? That I wouldn't slip into Lay's kingdom again and be stuck there for all eternity? Or perhaps I would end up in hell. The thought of spending all eternity with Satan terrified me almost as much as the prospect of spending it with my stepfather. The more I thought about all this, the more terrifying Lane seemed. One afternoon, as I sat in the back of his pickup with Susan's daughter, Sally and Cynthia, I watched as Lane parked the truck and walked into a convenience store with his crooked step. From behind, I could see dirty pink hands at the end of forearms, filthy from grease stains. When he got to the door and he turned briefly to smile back at me, deep crow's feet stretched from his eyes, intersecting the wrinkles etched across his brows and cheeks, making his face look as if it were formed of globs of clay. I met his smile with an angry glare. Once Lane was gone, I wrapped my lightly freckled arms around my legs, pulled my knees up close to my chest, and moved away from the gunny sack of pine nuts I'd been sitting up against. "Are you okay, Ruthie?" Sally asked. I slowly turned to face her. She wore her hair in short bangs that lay over her dark eyebrows and milky white forehead, with a straight part down the middle and brown barrettes on either side. I glanced at Cynthia, who, despite my age, wore her hair in exactly the same style as her sister, right down to the barrettes. From there, my gaze floated down to Cynthia's face. She stared at me with a frightening look in her eyes. For a moment, I thought that the angry look I'd given Lane had scared her, but it wasn't a face of fear. I realized it was a face beyond fear, a face like mine. I turned to her older sister. "Sally, does Lane ever kiss you on the mouth when you're alone with him?" I felt the hot sun beating down on us, and the smell of toasted pine nuts filled the air. Sally's eyes widened. So did Cynthia's. They turned to look at each other, then back at me, their expressions blank. Then tears began to form at the corners of Cynthia's eyes. She turned her head down, pulled her legs to her chest, her face in her palms, and she began to sob. Sally, too, began to cry, her 12-year-old body trembling as the truth struggled its way out of her, and she looked at me with an expression I had seen before in the mirror. "All right, then. Thanks, have a good day," said a deep, dreaded voice in the distance. Our eyes darted up. Lane stood in the door of the store, looking back at the manager. My stepsisters and I straightened our backs against the hard metal cab and pulled ourselves together. I sniffled and pinched my runny nose with my fingertips and wiped my hands on my jeans as Lane appeared beside the truck and poured the pine nuts from a Dixie cup back in the bag beside me. Anyone want to ride home up front with me?" he asked in his nice man voice. We shook our heads and said no thanks. We didn't look at him. He climbed back in the truck and drove us home. My stomach twisted as I sat on the thin living room carpet in Alejandro's trailer that night with an untouched bean and cheese burrito on a paper plate over my lap. Sally, Cynthia, and I had gone for a walk around the trailer park loop trail once Lane had parked the truck, where I discovered that their experiences had been almost identical to mine. Like me, each had thought she was the only one who'd been harmed, but unlike me, they had never told their mother. My stepsisters and I were afraid that our moms wouldn't believe us or that we might be punished. Then again, it would be a lot harder for our mothers to doubt all three of us. So we vowed to go together to tell them the truth that night. Please believe these girls. My stomach balled up and the skin on my face felt hot. I was no longer alone in my suffering, but still I dreaded the night's confrontation. It was Alejandro's turn with Lane that night, and as we walked back to the camper, I asked Mom if I could talk with her in private. It felt crazy to be asking this of a woman who was carrying one baby in her arms and felt another tugging at her pants, but Mom said sure, we could talk before she put the little ones to bed. We hadn't been inside the camper 2 minutes when we heard a light tapping at the door. As I opened the door, Micah climbed up onto a seat near Mom had laid Elena. Mind if we come on in? Said Susan sweetly. Sally and Cynthia were just behind her. The two seemed as nervous as I was, with tight faces and closed, straight lips. I made room for them all as they stepped down the narrow space between the stove and the tiny fridge and sat at the table. Mom put a pink baby blanket over her shoulder, covered her nursing breast, and lifted her blouse beneath it so that Elena, still just a month old, could nurse. The camper grew completely silent, except for the sound of the baby sucking. "What's going on, girls?" Mom finally said. Susan stood in the narrow hall with her forearms folded between her pregnant belly and her chest. Oh, wow. It's like, it just goes to show you the depravity of the situation and how many children he did this to. And it makes me wonder how Irene didn't know all of this. She nodded as if she was about to ask the same question. My stepsisters and I looked at each other as if wondering who should speak first. I decided it would be me. "Mom, do you remember what happened with Lane in El Paso?" I said, my pulse pounding in my neck and my eyes boring holes into into the tablecloth. I looked at her. She nodded. "He never stopped." I fought as hard as I could to keep from crying. "Are you sure?" "What do you mean, are you sure?" I looked up, surprised to hear the deep skepticism in her voice. She was squinting from the glare of the bare light bulb over her head, but I no longer felt intimidated. I told Mom and Susan everything, describing all the times Lane had pulled me onto his lap and put his hands on me when he had asked me to run errands with him. Then Sally and Cynthia explained that he had done the exact things to them. Susan looked wide-eyed, obviously stunned, and turned to Mom, who appeared shocked and perturbed. "Well, how come you girls haven't said anything before?" Susan asked. "He said if we told anyone," Sally answered, "it would make you mad and you feel bad." She put her elbows on the table next to mine, drew in the stifling air, and held her chin in her hands. Mom and Susan looked at each other again, their faces unchanged. Elena had stopped nursing, and not until Mom looked down as if she'd completely forgotten a baby was there did I realize I'd gotten through to her. She put Elena on her shoulder and patted her back, the rubber sole of her shoes tapping at the same time. For a while, I thought she might be at a loss for words, but then came the torrent of questions. Are you sure you're not saying this about Lane because you girls don't like him? This is the stuff that pisses me off. It was said in the comment section, and I can't remember your screen name, but you are so right when you said, when a child comes to you and tells you something like this, believe them. Believe them. Even if you may find out later, which is rare, that the child isn't telling the truth, believe them. Don't do this to them. When did this all happen? If this really did happen, why didn't you come to us with this sooner? They didn't come to y'all with this sooner because look at how y'all are responding. I corroborated Sally's story in a tired voice, sounding like a teacher who's told her students something 100 times. Lane told us not to tell you because he said we would hurt your feelings, and we thought we'd get in trouble and he'd whip us with his belt. My stepsisters nodded in agreement. We were embarrassed, Sally added. We were afraid that you wouldn't believe us, but now there's 3 of us. As her voice trailed off, I watched Mom closely, afraid that she thought we were lying. Finally, she put her hand over her mouth, bowed her head, and caught a few tears on her fingertips as they fell down her cheeks. As hard as I tried to be calm and grown up, the sight of Mom crying was just too much for me. My eyes welled up and my throat tightened. I don't believe this is happening, Mom sobbed. What are we going to do? I have no idea. Suzanne's arms were still folded over her round belly. I guess we should talk to Lane about this together so he knows all 3 girls came forward. Let's get the kids in bed, Mom said. After the 2 had stared at each other a moment, we should talk to him tonight while all the kids are asleep. Alejandra won't like if we bother him on her night, Susan added. I don't care about that. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, for not caring about messing up somebody's other night when it comes to this situation. Your girls are being touched, which means other ones are probably being touched too. I don't care about that. Mom sounded partly angry and partly desperate to find out what Lane had to say. She sniffled and wiped her nose. We needed to get to the bottom of this tonight. Late that evening, Mom finally returned to our camper from her meeting with Lane and Suzanne, but I was still wide awake, waiting to hear what had happened. Instead, Mom walked right past me, a dark figure whose face I couldn't make out, and went to bed. You should be comforting your child. When I say that this pisses me off and breaks my heart, you're thinking about the wrong thing. Your daughter just told you that she told you already what he was doing to her, and it never stopped. At what point do you console her? At what point do you comfort her? At what point do you say, baby, this isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Thank you for being so brave and telling me. Instead, you're worried about how this affects you. Like you don't have, especially in her case, because she had parents that were willing to help her in any way possible. Like you don't have ways to survive without this man. And I'm saying all this to say, because if you were here for the other book, we know what happens to Kathy and we know where she is when it happens. Lane usually came to get me and take me to go sell pine nuts each morning. But the morning after Sally, Cynthia, and I told our moms about what happened, he didn't come. Mom said Lane had asked one of Maria's younger brothers to go with her to the Safeway parking lot. So y'all don't think he does things to little boys too? If he does it to little girls, he does it to little boys. Why isn't Ruthie going to work today? Demanded Matt, who was forever watching to make sure I did my part. She's staying home with me today, Mom replied. I need to go grocery shopping and need some help cleaning up. You go on and mind your own business. Once he and everyone else had left the house for jobs or play, Mom sat me down across from her at the table. Elena was in her arms, nursing again. Ruthie. Suzanne and I talked to Lane for a long time last night. Mom's eyes were closed and her head was turned away. And he said he's very sorry for what he did to you girls. She took in a deep breath, leaned back against the foam seat, and rested her head against the window. He even cried real hard when we talked about it. I'm telling you guys now that this lady is about to not protect this little girl. I'm telling y'all now that the fact that she's talking about how he cried really badly and all these other things is because she's probably going to stay with him. Let's see. Tell me what you think. We at 35 and change. Tell me what you think. Mom opened her eyes to check on Elena's nursing, still without looking at me. The fact that she's not looking at her is making me feel like this lady is going to stay with this man. He promises he'll never do anything like that again. He promised the same thing last time, lady. I watched her draw in a breath and blow it out slowly, and I believe him. I know in my heart that he's ready to repent, and at last, she looked at me with watery eyes, her lips lowered the corners. I think he deserves another chance. Y'all gonna be mad at me. I no longer feel bad about what happened to Kathy. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I don't. We know what happened in Irene's book, and hearing this, I don't care what they were taught, this isn't right. And I don't feel bad for what happened to Kathy. I don't. At all. Because your child just sat there and told you what was going on, and you come the next morning. At no point did you decide, I'm going to comfort her. And what you do instead is you, in essence, tell her she should forgive this man. She broke out in sobs, but collected herself when she registered the shock and the fury on my face. I know that's not what you want to hear, but Ruthie, I want you to listen to me real well, because you need to understand that Lane is a good man. He has some problems, but God can help him get over them. Jesus talks so much about forgiveness in the Bible. He says that we should forgive 70 times 7. And your dad always talked about how important it is to give people another chance, not when you're touching kids. We can have different thoughts about forgiveness. You can forgive somebody and not want to be around them. But I do not think that you should have to forgive anybody when it comes to stuff like this. I'm just saying, me personally, my belief system, She continued for a bit longer, but I had drifted away, realizing that my earlier suspicions had been correct. Mom seemed perfectly willing to sacrifice me for Lane. This can't be, I told myself. I must be misunderstanding. I'm not going to forgive him, Mom. I don't want to live with him anymore. I know you don't, sis, but it's not in God's plan for women to be single. What the? I'm having all types of emotions, y'all, while reading this book. This is crazy. This is crazy. I looked at her puzzled. I want what God wants, and I know this is the right thing to do. Elena had fallen asleep, Mom laid her onto the blanket beside her. He was crying, Ruthie. So, because this perv, this grapist, I'm putting a G in front of it because of the way that YouTube picks up things. Because this grapist, this person who is assaulting this child cried, it's okay. I wondered how it didn't occur to Mom that I cried too. Countless times over the years. Tears of pain, tears of anger, tears of shame. But that morning, I couldn't cry. I was beyond tears. Finally realizing that Mom couldn't protect me from my stepfather made me feel too sad to cry. It was as though something in me just closed up. I want you to know, Ruthie, that if it happens again, if it ever happens again, you tell me right away. Why is she telling you right away? Because you're not going to do anything. Anything that you say to her at this point is a lie. You tell me right away, and I will leave him for sure. Mom tapped her forefinger hard on the table as she spoke those last words, and I knew that they were no more sincere or truer than the non-apology Lane had given me so many years ago in El Paso, when he had promised he would never touch me that way again. Apparently, my mom could lie to her own daughter with as much ease and confidence as she had when she lied to the social workers and the border patrol men. The only difference was that this time it seemed as if she had actually convinced herself that she was telling the truth. For now, Susan and I are going to pack our things and go back to LeBaron for the rest of the summer so you girls can have a break before school starts again. Oh, so he's basically sending y'all away so y'all forgive him. So Susan is going to stay with him too. Y'all are pieces of sugar honey iced tea. Both of them moms. Lane will stay here with Alejandra and keep working. Did y'all tell everybody what he did? Because everybody should know. She looked at me as if she expected expressions of gratitude. Now it was my turn to avoid her gaze. Life is going to get better. It will work out for the best, she continued weakly before she broke into tears again. Girls, stop crying. Like, what are you crying for? This is one of those times when we have to show God we have the power to forgive. Her sobbing increased until her words were almost unintelligible. Just like Jesus taught us in the Bible. She folded her arms on the table and buried her head in them. That night, as she and I raced to ready the camper for the trip back to LeBaron, I caught her occasionally wiping her eyes and sniffling. She shed many tears that day, but I didn't think a single one of them was for me. Because it wasn't. Because it wasn't. It wasn't for you. It was for herself. Everything that Kathy does is for herself. Everything that Kathy does is about herself and about that man and about them kids. And I'm sorry, but I refuse to believe that that lady really thought that that man was going to change. Not with this being the second time your child has told you that he's done this and that it never stopped. You really thought he was going to change. And I'm upset with Susan too, because both of your girls have told you how he's assaulted them and y'all don't band together and protect these kids. I got a problem with it. This chapter was rough. I got to take a break to recenter myself. I'll be back. See you guys on Wednesday.